right, to start off this evening, I'm going to tell you kind of a funny and kind of a awful story that happened to me recently. This summer, my family, I have 4 siblings, and we had the opportunity to go on vacation together. And so there's 13 grandkids altogether. And towards the end of the week, we had been together for 4 or 5 days. And at this point, Matt and I have the youngest grandchild, Nora. She's 4 years old. By this time, she had kind of reached her limit of excitement and everything that was going on. I mean, she was loving it. There's no doubt about that. But it was just that she was not taking any naps, and we were constantly doing activity after activity. And so it was one of the final days that we were together. Several of my siblings and all the grandkids went blueberry picking together, which was very fun. But at the end of the event, we wanted to take a picture together. And my mom loves to have a picture each year of all the grandkids lined up according to age, and then we do one according to height. And so we thought this would be a good opportunity to do that. And so we go to get all the grandkids lined up, and Nora realizes she is going to be at the very end of the line, and she is the smallest. Not for long, but she is the smallest, and she... not for long that she will not be the smallest, like in height is what I mean. I didn't mean give any. I just realized that, yes. Do not have plans to have more children right now. But anyway, so she realized that she was at the end, and she got embarrassed, and she was, again, exhausted and tired and hot, and so she refused to be in the picture. And I thought, you know what, I'm not going to fight this battle. It's okay if you don't want to be in the picture. And so she is being grumpy. So everybody else takes the picture. And then we go ahead and take a family picture together. And I kind of said, Grandma's going to be bummed that you're not in this picture. And kind of was hoping that guilt trip would help. But we take this family picture, and she says, okay, I'll be in it. So we're going to put that picture up right now. Can you see how Nora... She's very reluctant to be in this picture. She's put her head towards me. So once we finished with that, I said, Nora, wouldn't you just do it? Wouldn't you just do a picture where we can all line up together? And so she agrees that she's going to do it. So everybody gets back lined up again, all the grandkids, and then nope, not going to happen. She refuses. She kind of throws this little fit. So I said, okay, it's all right, whatever. And so my siblings are very kind, and they know what it's like to have a 4-year-old who's tired. So they went off to their cars. We were going to be leaving. And in my van, I was driving, and then I had my 4 kids, 3 boys and Nora, and then our cousin, my nephew, the kid's cousin, who's a 13-year-old boy, Jake, really sweet kid. So as we're starting to get in the van, Nora decides she is furious that she's not riding with her girl cousins, which is how she got to the blueberry patch. But at this point, I know she is exhausted, and this isn't going to be a good ride home for anybody if she gets in a car with anybody else. I said, no, you're coming with me. So she braces herself like she is not going to get into the car. So I'm like trying to force her into the car. My brother comes over. He's so kind. Mary, can I help you? And Nora, come on, get in the car. You can get in the car. And she's having nothing to do with him. I'm trying to get him in. I said, Ben, it's just better if you go ahead and just leave. So everybody leaves. My sister, who's here, she texts me, do you know how to get home? I think she knows what it's like to have a 4-year-old throwing a fit, like, I'm just going to let you be, but do you really know how to get home from here? So everybody leaves. I am forcing Nora in the car. She's screaming. The boys are all sitting in the car, buckled in, waiting. As I'm trying to get her in, I look over, and there's a tent, kind of like a 10 by 10 tent set up. And there's an older couple just sitting. I have no idea why they're sitting there. But they were just sitting in their seat, and we were parked directly in front of them, so they can see right into my car. They can see what's going on. And I said, come on, Nora, just get in the car. She and I are arguing back and forth. I cannot get her in. I finally get her in her seat, buckle her in, and then she just releases the seatbelt, and she will not stay buckled. And this is not the first time a situation like this has happened to me. Unfortunately, I have some very strong-willed children, so I said, stay buckled. By this time, I'm tired. I'm losing my patience. Stay buckled. And everybody's waiting for me. She keeps releasing the seatbelt. I keep buckling in. She keeps releasing it. So our, at the time, 6-year-old son, Lincoln, was sitting next to her, and I said, can you just hold your hand over her seatbelt, like the release? So I get in the front. He puts his hand like this, and she starts just nailing him which he is a little firecracker himself, but he's very sensitive too. And when she started hitting him, he was holding on and he was trying not to cry. She's just going full force at him. And then he starts crying, and I said, "That's it." Okay, I had put the car into reverse because we were going to be leaving. I had lost my mind at this point. I, not knowing, not thinking that I have the car in reverse, get my foot off the pedal, go to the back, get in the back. The car starts going. Okay, all my boys are sitting there, and my nephew, who thinks I am crazy at this point, goes, "Aunt Mary, the car's moving. And meanwhile, let's remember that couple is sitting there watching me. The car, it was the Lord that nobody was coming in, nobody was walking behind me. So I jumped in the front, got in the car, we went in reverse, I pulled over, I parked in another parking spot so we wouldn't have an audience. Some things went down in the car that I'm not real happy about, but they went down. Finally, we all got control of ourselves. Nora got buckled, and we were able to start making it home. And again, this is a situation that happens sometimes when you have little kids and they're pushed to their limit and they're exhausted. But that kind of situation, at that point, we were both sweating, we were just tired, we needed to get home. And it was kind of an overwhelming situation at the moment. It's funny now to look back at it and laugh, but it was overwhelming. And on a more serious note, there's times in our lives, and sometimes it's a situation, and sometimes it's a whole season of life where we are in an overwhelming situation. And for some of us, what can be overwhelming to us, it might be a bad marriage. It might be a stressful job that we're in. It might be a rough family situation. Maybe it's just the unexpected arising that is overwhelming us. Maybe it's a financial situation that's overwhelming you. Maybe it's that you're just exhausted in life. You have so much going on, and you just feel overwhelmed, and it's kind of taken over your whole life, that overwhelming feeling. And at those times in our life when we're feeling overwhelmed, we have a tendency to look to certain things to calm us or to fulfill us or to bring us the peace that we're searching for. And when I was thinking of some of the things that I've turned to in the past and some of the things I know that people in general turn to, I think it's things like sometimes we look for relationships to sustain us, whether that's in a marriage relationship. Sometimes we look for friendships to calm that overwhelming feeling. Sometimes maybe it's a boyfriend situation that you're looking to. Maybe it's your children that you're looking to calm you. Maybe it's you feel like when you go shopping and you're in an overwhelming situation, like shopping's really an outlet for you. So buying things or getting something new or redecorating your home or something like that maybe brings you what you think is peace. Maybe it's just being on social media and checking out what everybody else is doing and always staying up to date on everything that you think will ease the overwhelming feeling that you have in your life. Maybe it's that you're super into fitness, and if you channel all your energy towards that when you feel overwhelmed, that will somehow bring you peace. Maybe it's doing projects. Matt referenced this Sunday in his message that I read this summer, just kind of on a whim, the book that's talking about if you get rid of stuff, what that does to your life. And there's some good principles about organizing and things, but I totally disagreed with the author when she says that getting rid of things is what will bring you peace, that if you're able to declutter your life, somehow that will bring you an inner peace that will sustain you. So maybe it's something like that you feel will bring you peace. But today we're going to look at a passage of somebody who was facing a very, very overwhelming experience in his life. We're going to look and see what he did when he faced that overwhelming situation. We're going to look at the story of King David, and the passage we're going to be in is Psalms 3, and you have some Bibles on your table. If you'd like to turn there, you can kind of just hold your place there, kind of right in the middle of your Bible, Psalm 3. But as you turn there, I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about where David is at in this psalm, what his frame of mind is, and what he's been through that has led him to this very situation. And so King David, he was the king of Israel, for those of you who don't know that. And he had many wives at the time, and he had many children. And one of his sons' name was Absalom. And that's where we're going to focus on what Absalom does to David in this story. But David also had a son named Ammon. And Ammon ended up, it's a crazy story, he ended up raping his sister Tamar. So he does this, and Absalom, another son of David, finds out this information and becomes very furious about it. And he's very angry and upset about it. And over a course of several years, he develops this plan, and he ends up killing Ammon. So Absalom has killed his brother because of what he's done to his sister. And when David finds out, he is mournful, just like any of us would be, I think, if we lost a child. He's mourning for that son who's died. Even though he knows what his son did to his daughter, he's still mourning that. And so Absalom knows that his father's upset, and so he flees. He flees Jerusalem, and he's gone for a while. But then, over the course of time, he ends up returning back to Jerusalem. And he doesn't live in the palace, but he has interaction with David. And he ends up turning on David, and he stands outside the gates of the palace, and as people walk by, he turns them against David. He says, King David won't see you, but if I were king, I would see you. And so he builds up the animosity in the people, and they get angry, and they turn against David. And so then what Absalom does is he flees again, but he takes that group of people with him. So King David finds out that his son has turned all these people against him, that he's got a large group of people that are willing to fight for him, and King David gets nervous and he gets scared, just like any of us would, and he flees. He realizes his life is in jeopardy, so he flees out into the wilderness. And so when we think about that, we think of a king who has so many men under him. We think of a king who is very, very prosperous. We then think of a king who loses or has his daughter raped by his son, and then also a son that is killed. And now he has a son that is coming against him and has run him out into the wilderness. I mean, I think all of us would agree that this is a very, very overwhelming situation. When he gets to the wilderness, he's trying to hide in safety. And if you want to turn actually to 2 Samuel 15, there's a verse here where David is climbing up. He's very, very sad. It says he's weeping. It's 2 Samuel 15, verse 30. It said, "But David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went, barefoot and with his head covered. And all the people who were with him covered their heads, and they went up weeping as they went." It's just a sad scene of a man who's just really broken and who has now had to hide. Once he was just enthroned, this king that everybody looked up to, and now this series of events has happened, and he's hiding, and he's overwhelmed by what is going on in his life. Now let's go back to Psalm 3, and we're going to look and we're going to see. This is where the story picks up, is in Psalm 3. So David has gone to the wilderness, and he's there, and he's in hiding. And this is what he says. He starts off and he says, "O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God." So right here in these first two verses, we see that David is saying to God, I'm overwhelmed. Like, I have hundreds of men, thousands of men coming after me who want to kill me. And he's voicing to God his frustration. He's voicing to God what is overwhelming him. Much of what is happening to him in this situation is due to his own actions. So David had, in the past, had committed adultery and had a man killed. The woman that he committed adultery with, he had her husband killed, and he then had a son with this woman. And God told him that there was going to be a curse on him, and that for a generation, so he was going to have a child who was going to come up and rise against him. So many of what was happening to David was because of some of the choices that he made in life. But either way, he is still feeling overwhelmed. And sometimes in our lives, the things that are happening to us that are overwhelming are partly due to the choices that we've made. But when we're in that state of being overwhelmed, it's what do we do next? So we're going to see what David does here. The verses that we just read there, we see that David is truly in trouble. And he's crying out. He's saying, many are saying of my soul, there's no salvation for him in God. Talking about his foes rising against him. And I think if we were to take maybe an overwhelming situation that we might be in right now, if we had that, and we could fill in those two sentences in Psalm 3 with our own overwhelming situation, we could say something like, my marriage is falling apart and everyone is saying there's no hope. Or maybe my child is an addict and there seems to be no way out. Or I'm stressed out about my financial situation and I have no solution. There are so many different things that we could fill in the blank with what's overwhelming to us. And in fact, in my Thursday morning Women's Connect group yesterday, I asked the women if anybody was willing to fill out a little sheet of paper of something that was overwhelming to them. And then some ladies were willing to do that tonight. I'm not going to share any names, but these are things that people a lot of them are in this room right now, are overwhelmed with. We have somebody who's overwhelmed with that they want to grow in their faith, but they see what the challenges are ahead of them. We have people who are overwhelmed with a job loss, a bad health diagnosis, a death of a family member. We have people who are overwhelmed with keeping situations healthy in a God-centered perspective. We have people who are overwhelmed needing direction in regards to dealing with a sister's salvation. They need the right words. We have somebody who's overwhelmed in their financial stability. They have one income, and they're trying to figure out how they can manage. I mean, these are just a few of the situations. I think if we went around each table, we could find out that there's many, many more people who are feeling overwhelmed, just like David is. So he voices out to God what's overwhelming him. But let's move on and see what he does next, because I think this is what's so important, and it lays out a really good plan for what do we do next. So we're overwhelmed, okay? I think all of us can nod our heads, yeah. Now what do we do? So let's read verse 3. It says, he now says, but you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. So in verse 3 there, he's reminding himself of who God really is. And we have to do that same thing. When we are in an overwhelming situation, we have to stop and we have to remind ourselves, who is God? What is God able to do? And the first thing he says is, you are a shield about me. He is looking to God for his safety. Now, he is literally looking to God for his safety in this passage because he has an army coming towards him trying to kill him. So he's recognizing, you, oh God, are my shield. You're the only thing that's going to protect me. You're my protector. He's his defender. He's recognizing that God is his defender. And that's something that we have to do when we're faced with our overwhelming situation. We have to stop and we have to recognize God is our shield. He is our protector. He is our defender. Only in God can we find safety. I was thinking if I had a story that related to this, and there's been times in my life when people have said things that aren't true about me. People have said things that are true about my spouse and about my family, and super hurtful things. But I wasn't in a situation where I could stand up and defend and kind of combat what they were saying with our side of the story, or maybe a lot of information that they weren't able to access or know about, but I knew about, but it wasn't the right place or time for me to stand up and say something, kind of defend myself. And in that situation, as tough as it was, I had to recognize I don't have to be my defender in this situation. I don't have to be the one who rises up and says something against it. I can allow God to do that. And that's what David's recognizing in this psalm. He's saying, you, oh God, are my shield. You're the one who's going to defend me. And that applies to all of us in our overwhelming situation. God is the one who's going to defend us. He goes on to say, you are my glory, recognizing that the honor is God. That he, even though David was just not too long ago sitting on his throne and now he's been overturned, his honor, his praise isn't what's important there. It's God who's important there, the honor belonging to God. So he's recognizing, even though I'm not where I was, even though everybody's not acknowledging me as king, I don't need that right now. You are my honor, God. no matter what our circumstances are, God still remains worthy. I think that's something we need to remember when we're in an overwhelming situation, that God defends us, but that it's not about us in that situation. God is still on his throne, and he still is worthy. And then the next part, he says, "You are the lifter of my head." And I love this part because David is recognizing that God is the one who can turn situations around. God is the one who can be his encourager. In Isaiah 40, verses 28 through 29, you don't have to turn there, but I'll just read it to you. It says, "Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength." It's just a beautiful picture of when we're broken down, when we're feeling overwhelmed, when we're feeling faint, God is the lifter of our head. He's saying, "I'm here, I'm your encourager. I'm your shield, I will protect you. The honor is mine, and I'm going to encourage you. I'm going to help you along in this situation." So David is recognizing that. So David has taken these verses, and if we go on to the next one more, it says, "I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill." When we cry out to God, when we're feeling overwhelmed, we're recognizing that, and we cry out to God, David is recognizing that God hears us exactly where we are. We don't have to be in this sanctuary in a church for God to hear our cries. We don't have to be in a small group where we're having prayer requests that God hears our cry. God hears our cry anywhere. At this point in the Psalms, David is in the wilderness, and God is hearing him exactly where he is. He's in hiding. He's broken, and God is hearing him right where he is, and David is remembering these things. David was hiding, yet still had access to God. And he's saying here, that's what we are to do. We are to tell God exactly what we are going through, what's overwhelming us. The next verse, in verse 5, it says, "I lay down and slept. I woke up again, for the Lord sustained me." So if we can picture this being chased by an army, thousands and thousands of foes are coming after David, that he still had the ability to lay down and sleep. Like he woke up the next day. He's saying, "It's a new day. God, you sustained me. You're sustaining me through even a night's sleep." And in our own lives, we have to recognize God is the one who's going to sustain us in our overwhelming situation. There's been times that I've had an issue that has caused me to worry. I tend to worry about things, thinking that will be the solution. But when I finally hand it over to God and say, "God, I'm committing this situation to you. I'm overwhelmed. I'm going to turn to you to be my sustainer, not to other things, but to you." Sometimes just doing that will allow me, and I don't know if the case is the same for you, but just to be able to rest, to find rest, and to be able to even have a good night's sleep once we fully committed our issues over to God. And David's saying that even though he's in what is more overwhelming, I think, than any of us are going through, he was still able to lay down and to sleep, and God sustained him through that. So he's recognizing that. David had the hearts of the people more than any king did. And so if we think about that, he was the king of Israel that had all the men, the most men, and the most hearts than any other king did. And yet it changed in a moment's notice. So if he had allowed those things to be what was sustaining him, and those things to give him peace, it would be shattered in a moment because his people had turned against him. And the same thing goes for us. In our lives, when we're feeling that overwhelming feeling, if we're relying on other things to sustain us, those things can't handle the pressure to sustain us. Those things don't have the power to sustain us. And those things can change in a moment's notice. And so even in this situation, when David's in great danger, and even when feeling overwhelmed, he knows what it is that sustains him. So he's not looking to that army of men. He's not looking to the thousands of people who were under him. He's recognizing who it is who sustains him. And he recognizes what does not sustain him is his power, his fame, his wealth, his relationships, his circumstances. It's not his connections that are sustaining him. It's not his health that's sustaining him, and it's not his son's love. This was a very difficult situation for David because he desired for Absalom to love him, but Absalom has turned against him and is coming after him to kill him. And he's recognizing it's not even the love of my son that sustains me. It's only God that has the power to do that. So if we look at those past 3 verses where he's talking about God being his shield, his glory, the lifter of his head, and then when he's saying, God, you are my sustainer, we see that it's as if he's building himself up in faith. He's looking back at what God is and what God does. And that's what we have to do in our own life, is we have to remind ourselves of the things that God has done in our life. When we're faced with this overwhelming situation, we have to look back and say, okay, what has God done for me? What is the nature of God? What has he sustained me through in the past that can really be a faith booster and help me as I'm pressing on in this overwhelming situation? And if you don't have a relationship with God, if you're here tonight and this is all brand new to you and you're saying, I don't have any past experiences where God has come through for me, I want to encourage you, and we had this the same way I had some people write down things that were overwhelming them. Some people shared some things that God has sustained them through in the past. And I want to read those to you now. God sustained me through an almost failed marriage because of job loss, health issues, etc. God brought us closer and we have a better marriage than ever before. God carried me through 2 miscarriages and 1 preterm delivery. My son didn't survive. By God's grace and only once, I released control and found peace with not having children. God surprised me with my daughter. No problems or complications, and after 5+ years of loss and infertility, God's plan is always perfect. Somebody else said God had sustained them through a tough time by bringing them to a healthy church. While away at college, my brother was murdered by someone who was supposed to be his friend. And then to top it all off, it happened 3 days before Thanksgiving. Some years, the anniversary falls on Thanksgiving. My family survived because of God. It's still a struggle some days, but God is always ready when they come. I had a high-risk pregnancy and delivered our son, who was born 11 weeks early, but now has no ongoing medical concerns after being discharged from the NICU. I sustained this in the past. My husband got in an accident while intoxicated, and during that season, I was able to forgive and stay calm. Without God in my life, I would have probably left my husband due to alcohol. Somebody else said, I have struggled with my relationship with my mom over the past 3 years. Through constant prayer and asking for a genuine heart, God has rebuilt our relationship. God led us in a tough time to LCC to connect with people, and they put specifically Phil Vinrick, who has impacted our children's lives more than we ever could imagine. So these are people, many in this room tonight, who have had the testimony of things that God has sustained them through. They were facing, and those are some pretty overwhelming situations that have people in this room have experienced. And if we went around and asked everybody, I think a lot of us who've had a relationship with God can look back over the years and see what God has brought us through. And so those verses where David is saying, he's building his faith, he's recognizing what God is, who God is, and what he's done in his life and what he will do. We go on to verse 6. It says, I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. And it says, arise, O Lord, save me, O God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be on your people. If we look at verse 7, that's a pretty intense verse. It says, arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. It's like, bam. Well, this is what happened in this story. It's crazy, and a lot of it, if you're hearing this for the first time, you're probably thinking that I'm making up some of these things, but I'm not. What happened to Absalom, David's son, who was trying to overthrow him, is that he did die in a horrific death. He was being chased now by David's army. He was fleeing. He was on a donkey. His hair was caught in branches of a tree. The donkey continued to ride on, so he's hanging by his hair. And Joab, a friend of David, stepped in because David didn't want his son killed. He had said, please treat my son kindly if you catch him. But Joab knew that David would never rest if Absalom continued to live and continued to come after him. So Joab pierced him and killed him. And that's how Absalom dies. So we look at this verse. David didn't know that at this moment, but he says, for you strike my enemies on the cheek, you break the teeth of the wicked. He's saying, God, I know you'll handle my enemies. And God certainly did. That is how Absalom died. And we can see there that God was faithful, even in a strange way that we would look at and say, man, that's bizarre. But he took care of the situation for David. Everything was handled. And then verse 8, we see that David says, salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be on your people. David here in this part of the psalm is at a place where he has already told God that he's overwhelmed. He's then reminded himself of who God is and what God does. He's recognized that God is the only one who can sustain him. And now at this portion, he has the opportunity, even though his situation has not changed, he's still in that overwhelming situation, but he has the opportunity to praise God for what he's going to do. And he has a peace and a joy that's come over him that from the outsider looking in, we'd say, you shouldn't have peace and joy. You're in the wilderness still. You're in hiding. You're being chased after to be killed. But after reminding himself of those things, he can be at a place where he says, I can praise you, Lord. I know that salvation belongs to you. So he's ending it there with joy and peace and praise to God. So when we go back and we think about a situation that we may be in that's overwhelming us, maybe it's a specific situation, maybe it's a season that you're in that's overwhelming. Here are the things that we need to do. We need to recognize it, and I think that's probably the easiest part. It's very easy to know when you feel overwhelmed. We need to recognize and remember who God is and what he does. He's our shield. He's our protector. The honor, it belongs to him, and he's the lifter of our head. He's our encourager. We need to remember that he hears us. When we cry out to him, he hears us. Number 3, we need to remember what God has done for us. We need to go back and look at the things that God has been faithful in. The 4th thing we need to do is we need to recognize that it's only God that can sustain us. It's not the things of life. It's not more money. It's not relationships. It's not the idea of peace that can sustain us. It's a relationship with God. And then we need to praise him that we have peace and joy knowing that he loves us and he has a perfect plan for each one of us, including this current situation that we're in. God is not surprised by the current situation you're in. God's not surprised by what's overwhelming you. He has a plan to do something with that situation, but it requires us taking these steps and recognizing who he is. And again, if you are new here and this is something that you've never heard before, you don't have a relationship with God, then what your first step is to recognize that God is the only answer to your overwhelming situation. And when you come to terms with that and you truly believe that, you will find the fulfillment that only God can bring. Because you can look to other things to bring that fulfillment, and you might find a temporary fix. Something might work for a moment, but it's kind of just like a Band-Aid that you're putting over, and it's going to be ripped off, and you're going to turn to something else to find fulfillment in, and that's not going to work either, because God is the only thing that can bring fulfillment to our lives. Nothing else was designed for that purpose. So I'm going to pray over you now, and then we're going to have a time. Each table should have a table leader who has some small group questions that they're going to talk to you about. We're going to spend about 10 minutes in our groups talking about some of these things. And this is a perfect time. This is a really safe environment for you to share maybe something that you're experiencing. You don't have to go into details, and if you don't feel comfortable sharing, I understand. But groups work best when people participate in them. So I would encourage you, be encouraged that this is a group of people that will support you. And then at the end of your discussion, your table leader is going to close your table in prayer, and then we're going to do some door prizes. So don't sneak out because you'll really like the door prizes. All right, so let's go ahead and pray first. Lord, we know that life comes at us fast at times. We know there's so many details of life that can be overwhelming. There's so many different things that happen in the journey of life that are overwhelming to us. And when we feel overwhelmed, it's hard to focus on other things. It's hard to move past that and function well. We also know that you have a desire for us to come to you, that you're the only one that can sustain us in our relationships. You're the only one that can bring a peace to our lives. And we're thankful that you have the capability to bring peace even when we're in the midst of an overwhelming situation. It's not necessarily that our situation's taken away, but you can sustain us through it. Lord, we're so thankful for that. I pray for each woman here that you would meet them just right now, God, that you would touch their hearts, that if there's healing that needs to take place, that could happen. And if it's just them recognizing that they need to release this, even tonight to you, that they would have the courage to do that, Lord. We thank you for your love. We thank you for your care. We ask this in your name. Amen.